On Monday, Windsor has reaffirmed its Housing Accelerator Fund submission in hopes to access $40 to $70 million in federal funding. That submission prioritizes fourplex-by-right zoning in certain wards and neighborhoods and along some transit corridors, but it's already potentially jeopardized, most likely is jeopardized at the outset, because the federal government has said that they want fourplex-by-right zoning throughout the entire city for cities to be able to access any of the funds. And they've actually made it quite clear that they're not willing to have a fight about this. It's a closed door. Joining me to discuss right now is one of three councillors who voted no in reaffirming this submission, Ward 3 councillor Renaldo Agostino. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing really well. Thanks so much for joining me to discuss this. It's a really important issue as we're obviously in the midst of this housing crisis. So we know how you voted no. Why?
Well, I guess for me, I always, and listen, it might be a dangerous way to vote, but I always look at risk versus reward, right? And I look at my ward in the situation that I'm in downtown is I have a lot of people that are, that need homes. Some need homes, some need housing with supports. And, you know, I'd rather see, to me, that's the solution, right? Is trying to get people housed. And whatever it takes, I have to support it. You know what I mean? I have to support it because the risks for me are continuing to see what I'm seeing, some of the issues that are happening downtown. The reward is to see that cleaned up or partially cleaned up with the opportunity to clean up because none of us know what'll work or what doesn't. We have to take risks every day. On the other side, the risk of having a sewer issue or having to, you know, have some bylaw deal with some issues that may happen in neighborhoods where fourplexes go up, if they go up at all, right? Then when I weighed the two together, to me, it just makes sense, right? And I'd rather deal with a blown sewer main than deal with some of the issues that we deal with downtown. Now, I stand with council. The council's decision was made. I stand with it. I'm not so sure that the door is closed. I think that negotiations are happening and may or may not continue, but this will be the third time we've been told that the door was closed, but all of a sudden there was a crack in the door. So I'm hoping that cooler heads prevail and that we continue to negotiate with the federal government because there was a plan step up forward and maybe there's now a chance to play political volleyball, as it's called, to see what comes back. So, you know, for me, it's a no-brainer, you know, like I'm all for it. But I also understand some of the plights of other councillors, and unfortunately, this is what we do, right? Councillors represent their people, and if other councillors feel that this is what their people want to see done, for the most part, you have to do that. Now, there's times where you've got to sometimes go against your ward or what the people think because the information or what the people want, because you have to do the greater good for the city and the reports and the information that's dealt to you. You're responsible for being a leader. Right, so those things come into play as well. So it's a difficult situation, and like I said, I'm hoping that cooler heads prevail. And I know that the mayor's office and I know that the federal government continue to try and talk it out and work it out. And you know, we saw Oakville; they figured it out, they worked out. And hopefully Windsor's next on the list, and hopefully negotiations continue. Because at the end of the day, if Windsor loses, everybody loses, right? Our municipal government loses, our people lose. But the federal government loses as well, right? So I think the federal government and the municipal government and even the provincial government's involved in these conversations, needs to be involved in these conversations because this is not something that we should be politicking with because this is housing, right? This is the most important thing, one of the most important things on the block right now. And like I said, hopefully this ends up in a better place.
So some of the concerns that have been expressed by your council colleagues in regards to having fourplex-by-right throughout the entire city at large are infrastructure challenges as well as a loss of neighborhood character. What's your response to those claims?
I think a lot of that is it's guessing, right? You're predicting what might happen. It's not actual. It's not based in fact. Could it happen? Yes. Could it not happen? No. But I'll tell you what is happening, right? What is happening if there's a tap on and there's people falling out of that tap and we can't turn that tap off, right? So if this isn't the answer, what is the answer, right? Because we've got to get to those answers and that's our job. And that's kind of, you know, I think they're certainly listening to constituents. They're certainly listening to the residents and the people that live in their neighborhoods and those concerns, because that's their job. And I don't think anybody's not doing their job. I think everyone's kind of voting with their ward and seeing what's best for their ward. But there's a bigger picture here. And I think that we all have to work together to find a solution, because if not, we know one thing's for sure. We don't know what's going to happen by allowing 4x-right, but I can tell you exactly what's not going to happen by not allowing, what I can tell you exactly what's going to happen by not allowing it, right? And that's my angle on it.
And we're already seeing the repercussions of not doing anything right now, which quite frankly looks in many cases what some of the concerns that your council colleagues have brought up. You look to many neighborhoods in the city, you know, Ward 3 is a great example, but even in traditional areas you wouldn't expect. And Forest Glade is one that I hear often about, you know, 16, 17, 18, 20 people already in a house right now. So those challenges are already being faced.
Yeah, but those are different challenges, right? That's a different challenge, and that's a different conversation that needs to be had, right? So this is where things get, the waters get a little bit murky for me, right? So to say that we're not doing nothing, that's not true, right? That's not true, because the city did come back, and again, I didn't support it, but the city did come back and offer quite a reasonable amount of land to do something, right? So they did offer back to say, here's where we want to do this, this is how we want it done. So I think from that perspective, that needs to be looked at and say, okay, well, maybe you're not going to get to 40 million, right? Maybe you'll get 20, maybe you'll get 10, maybe we'll work with you and say, hey, we like what you did here, add in this additional stuff, and we'll go that way. So for me, it's not nothing. And then when it comes to 18 students living in a house, this is another conversation that needs to be had, right? Because we have this constant conversation about too many students, too many students, too many students, too many students. When do we have a conversation of how are we treating these students, right? Are 16 students necessarily living in a house because they can't find a place to live? I'm not so sure that's true. I think part of the reason that there's 16 students living in a house is because they're paying 5 times the amount of tuition that a normal student is paying. Right? So I think that's got to be entered into the conversation too, because the more students, it shouldn't be something that we look at and say, well, you know, we're having a student issue, we're having a student population issue, we're having a housing issue. Maybe the issue is that we're bringing people here that either A, may or may not have the financial wherewithal to survive in a manner that we appreciate in our community, or maybe we're just charging them too much, right? Maybe we're not giving them the opportunity. Maybe it's a transit issue. There's so many different pieces of this puzzle that need to be put together before we start spewing out, you know, what we think is the problem. Because I'm not so sure that we've really dug in to see what the problem really is when it comes to the students, right? Because I've had the pleasure of hiring many of these students to work for me in the past. And they were the best people. They worked the hardest. They're great people. So like, we're turning away great people, right? Rather than looking for ways to find solutions to take more. I don't know that answer yet, but something, you know, something inside me is a little bit skeptical about, you know, the checks and balances that we're using here, because when you're paying $50,000 a year for tuition, how could you not live with 16 people, right? Especially if you're coming from a foreign country, how could you not line up for food banks, right? So there's a lot of questions I have here, and these are some of the questions I've started asking throughout the community and to the powers that be to say, are we kind of looking at this the wrong way?
Well, it's, you know, it's very complex. There's so many different factors that come into play, as you were just going over. I want to shift gears a little bit just to the dollar amount that we might be losing out on. So again, 40 million up to 70. Let's just say it's probably was going to be 40, because that 70 was really tough to get to. But I've been doing some back of the napkin math of some infrastructure needs that Windsor has coming up. Mega Hospital is $250 million to service that. Sandwich South, $400 million. The bus garage is going to be $300 million. And then at budget on Monday, there were about 300 priorities that were outlined, infrastructure capital spends that needed to be done. For example, the Victoria Avenue University reimagining was one of those. That was $350 million. These are projects that need to get done, but we just don't have the funding for right now. You add all that up, that's like $1.5 billion. 40 million is a drop in a bucket to 1.5 billion, but it's still 40 million. My question to you is, can we actually afford to say no?
Well, this is a part of the conversation that came up on Monday, and I found it interesting. And I haven't had a chance to review my notes to answer this question. But one of the things that came up at our meeting on Monday was that if we were to receive this 40 million, a lot of that 40 million would have gone into the 4 by right studies that would have needed to be done. So it's not necessarily the case to say we gave up 40 million that we would have used somewhere else. Right? And again, I don't know if that's entirely factual, but it was said in council that, listen, if we're going to take the 40 million, understand that that 40 million isn't going to be used to build H4. That 40 million's got to be put into place to support the 4 by rights. So are you really losing or gaining, or what is really going on? Right? So these are questions that I need to wrap up too. But like I said, I'm hoping that everybody sees that there's a lot of points here politically that need to be saved, and whether it's from a municipal standpoint or from a federal standpoint, that we come out to a better place, because at the end of the day, the most important thing over that is getting homes for people.
Absolutely. Ward 3 Councillor Renaldo Agostino, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it today.
Thank you, brother. Have a great weekend.
You as well.